CGTN, China Global Television Network.
Live from London, this is The World Today.
Hello, I'm Jamie Owen. Welcome to the programme. Our top stories. Aid begins crossing into Gaza from Egypt's Rafah checkpoint, but the United Nations says it's just a drop in the ocean of what's needed. Dozens more Palestinians are killed as Israel maintains its heavy bombardment of Gaza. Prime Minister Benjamin Netanyahu vows to fight till victory. And world leaders and diplomats gather in Cairo for a summit to try to find solutions to the humanitarian crisis in Gaza. Trucks carrying humanitarian aid have begun entering Gaza from Egypt through the Rafah crossing after days of waiting at the border. 20 vehicles have so far gone through, which the United Nations says is far short of what's needed. Israeli airstrikes continue to devastate the besieged Palestinian enclave, with dozens of people killed overnight. It's been 2 weeks since the Palestinian armed group Hamas launched its assault into southern Israel, killing more than 1,400 people. Since then, Israeli strikes on Gaza have killed over 4,300, more than half of them women and children. Our correspondent Akram Al-Satiri is in southern Gaza.
Well, as was said by the UNRWA and was said by also the UN, the very same statements and the very same concerns were echoed even by the World Food Programme, whose director said that this is not sufficient for the people of Gaza. This cannot cover the increasing humanitarian need of the people. So in the very lacking situation, people of Gaza living with 1 million people who are already identified as IDPs, internally displaced people, and with 500,000 of them in the UNRWA shelters, of course, they say it's less than a drop in the ocean, and they understand it will never be able to tackle the increasing need amongst the people that are already displaced and that are in need of a daily care. The UNRWA said that the Gaza might need 100 truckloads every day when it comes to the basic necessities only.
Israel's aerial bombardment of Gaza continues. What more can you tell us about these latest attacks?
Well, the bombardments have been continuous in the Gaza South and Gaza North for whole time since the 14 past days. Just few minutes ago, the Israeli Air Force was dropping leaflets on Gaza North, was asking people in Gaza North to move to the south. By the way, the people in Gaza North and the south are alike. They are all subjected to the ongoing bombardment. We could hear in Rafah, when we were waiting at the border, around 5 or 6 different explosions coming from the 3-4 direction of Rafah city.
The Israeli government says efforts are underway to secure the release of more than 200 hostages who are being held by Hamas. On Friday, the Palestinian armed group released 2 US citizens in a deal brokered by Qatar. Our correspondent Ross Cullen is in Tel Aviv. Ross, what more have we heard from the Israeli government about hostages?
Well, Jamie, there's been an increase in the number of hostages, 210 now, the Israeli government says. Also, we've heard from Hamas, and they have said that they will not be ready to discuss the fate of the Israeli army captives until Israel stops its aggression and stops its bombing campaign. We know that among the people who've been taken captive, there are Israeli citizens, non-Israeli citizens, there are civilians, and also members of Israel's armed forces. Now, we did see 2 people released, civilians. An American-Israeli mother and daughter, Judith and Natalie Ranam, were released by Hamas unilaterally for humanitarian reasons, according to the Palestinian militant group yesterday. That that news has boosted chances that there could be further releases of captives. But in terms of those who are held hostage and are also members of Israel's armed forces, Hamas are saying there won't be any discussions about possible releasing of those soldiers until the end of the aggression, until the end of this bombing campaign, which is now 2 weeks long, which began in retaliation after the Hamas atrocities here inside Israel on the 7th of October.
Ross, we've been expecting the Israeli military to start what it says is the next phase of this conflict for several days now. Is there any sign when this might happen?
Well, the War Cabinet, Jamie, that's the cabinet that's made up of members of the National Unity Government. So Benjamin Netanyahu, the Defence Minister Yoav Gallant, and the former Defence Minister, opposition figure Benny Gantz. They went down to the southern area for a tour of the military reinforcements, the military preparations today in and around the Gaza border area, where there have been evacuations of residents in those southern towns and villages. And instead, they have been taken up by tens of thousands of troops, hundreds of tanks. The three members of the government were down there visiting some of the preparations, visiting the troops and the generals, getting ready for this widely expected and highly anticipated incursion into the Gaza Strip, which all of the members of the international community, the presidents, prime ministers, foreign ministers who were attending the Cairo Peace Summit in Egypt earlier today, they've agreed that will be an escalation if there were to be an Israeli military incursion into the Gaza Strip, just as the humanitarian effort is getting underway to try to bring aid into the Palestinian territory. There have also been Israeli armed forces reinforcements taking place and getting into position, Jamie, in the north of the country on the Lebanon border, because we have had 2 people wounded today inside Israel after anti-tank missiles were fired by Hezbollah from southern Lebanon. There have also been rockets and mortars launched towards Israel as well. And so there have been evacuations in the north, moving people out of harm's way, away from that area in the north to safety. And instead, again, Israeli soldiers taking up positions in the north of the country to try to fight off if there were to be any escalation of the conflict by any kind of incursion or attempted incursion into Israel by members of Hezbollah, which is the militant group based in Lebanon, which is backed by Iran. So there are still moves and preparations underway on the military side. But yes, as of yet, Jamie, no official start date or time for this military incursion by Israeli defence forces into the Gaza Strip.
Ross, thank you for that. Our correspondent Ross Cullen in Tel Aviv. Meanwhile, several world leaders and senior diplomats are gathering in Cairo for a summit, hoping to find solutions to the humanitarian crisis in Gaza. Our correspondent Adel Al-Marouki is in the Egyptian capital.
There is definitely a strong presence from leaders from the Arab world in Africa. And as you said, we're seeing less leaders from Europe. For instance, among the attendees is the Prime Minister of Italy, Spain, Greece, and the President of Cyprus. These are from Europe. Countries influential enough in the Palestinian crisis from Europe have also had representation on the foreign ministers level. That includes France, the UK, and Germany. In general, the talks here are trying to focus on 4 main stages of negotiations. That was more or less a plan presented by the Egyptian President Abdel Fattah al-Sisi. He first wants to guarantee humanitarian access into Gaza continuously throughout this continuous war as it enters its 3rd week. Secondly, President al-Sisi wants help internationally to push for mediation efforts and talks for a ceasefire. From that, he hopes this would lead to a revival of the peace talks between the Palestinians and Israelis. And at the end, no matter how long it will take, he wants these efforts to aim for the establishment of an independent Palestinian state. That comes in addition to requests from the Palestinian president for Palestine to be recognized as a full member in the United Nations in the meantime.
Adele, realistically, what are the prospects for any progress at the summit, given who's not there?
Well, even if people were there, the diversity of the countries involved in these talks does not allow it for them to have like a kind of an executive plan. We are talking from leaders from Europe, Asia, Africa, Canada, the United States has its envoy here, China has its envoy to the Middle East here as well. So by nature, all these countries belong to other regional organizations that are more influential in terms of taking executive measures, like the African Union, the Arab League, the European Union, and the United Nations. So generally, what we're talking here, the summit is basically talking about having some sort of global acceptance, if that may apply, to the countries that are participating, which is a decent number of countries, about 34 or 36 are here. So if these countries can at least agree on a roadmap for talks and for helping in a ceasefire that is expected to last a bit longer, then at least there is a track that the international community agrees on. And from there, this could be driven to other rounds of talks within these international or regional organizations so that it can be translated into an executive plan. But to expect something groundbreaking or a breakthrough from the Cairo summit, I think it's a bit unlikely.
London's police force says up to 100,000 people have attended a March for Palestine rally. Protesters called for a ceasefire in Gaza and the safe delivery of humanitarian aid. It's the second rally organised by the Palestine Solidarity Campaign Group. Similar protests have been held in Rome, Sydney, Bangkok and other cities. India has successfully conducted the first test flight of its Gaganyaan mission aimed at sending astronauts into space by the year 2025. The test of the crew escape system has been twice delayed. Several unmanned launches are scheduled as part of this mission, including sending a robot into space next year. A second red danger warning has been issued in the UK and eastern Scotland as Storm Babette continues to present a danger to life. 3 people have been killed as torrential rain and heavy winds swept across large areas of the country. Thousands of homes are without power. The former England and Manchester United footballer Sir Bobby Charlton has died at the age of 86. Charlton was a part of the England side that won the 1966 World Cup and was a key figure in Manchester United's revival after the Munich air disaster, helping them to become the first English club to win the European Cup in 1968. You're watching CGTN. Still ahead, remembering Aberfan. 57 years ago today, 116 children and 28 adults killed when a coal tip buried their school.
Ever wondered what's the difference between a bear and a bull market? Where are the cash cows? And who are the lame ducks? And what exactly are black swans? Grey rhinos? And unicorn companies? Make sense of it all with Global Business, only on CGTN.
I think it should be more global cooperation.
I would like to hear more the voice of the developing countries.
Globalization has lifted more than 1 billion people out of poverty.
The green transition has to happen. It's a necessity.
Well, China and the United States are important powers in the world.
What unites us is much more than what divides us.
And I believe China is committed to this agenda.
Join me, Juliet Mann, to set the agenda at these times every weekend on CGTN.
Events have consequences. Words create impact.
One more offensive in a long line of battles that's been ongoing for more...
Just got to be careful here with some gunshots. Excuse us.
The world today matters for your world tomorrow.
The number of casualties is growing quickly.
This is one of the hardest hit towns in the region.
The world today, every day on CGTN.
Join us in San Francisco on November 14th through 16th for the most influential meeting of the world's leaders and business executives in the Asia Pacific. The APEC CEO Summit 2023 will focus on creating economic opportunity. The summit will promote sustainability, inclusion, resilience, and innovation across the Asia-Pacific. Don't miss your chance to be part of the conversation. Request your invitation at apecceosummit2023.com.
Hello, welcome back. A reminder of our top stories. Aid begins crossing into Gaza from Egypt's Rafah checkpoint, but the United Nations says it's just a drop in the ocean of what's needed. Dozens more Palestinians are killed as Israel maintains its heavy bombardment of Gaza. Prime Minister Benjamin Netanyahu vows to fight till victory. And world leaders and diplomats have gathered in Cairo for a summit to try to find solutions to the humanitarian crisis in Gaza. Well, Israel is continuing to mass troops and armoured vehicles near Gaza ahead of an expected land offensive, but they've yet to cross the border. Sean Bell is a retired Air Vice Marshal and military analyst.
I think from a military analyst perspective, two most likely reasons, one of which is political pressure. You'll remember Antony Blinken and Lloyd Austin, the American diplomats, were pushing very hard to Netanyahu to try to moderate his actions, to try to make clear that all civilian lives matter and give some time for the Palestinians to move south. But from the main reason, I think, is almost certainly that if you wind the clock back 2 weeks, Israel was as near to peace as it has been over the last few years. And then all of a sudden, it's looking to wage its biggest military campaign for decades. And they mobilized 350,000 people. They plan to a joint military operation, air, land and maritime together. And I know firsthand those are incredibly difficult operations to pull together. So training the people, getting the logistics right, preparing to do the job properly rather than fudging it, which will be extremely dangerous. I think those are the main reasons why we've seen a delay to date.
How complex a military operation will this be when Israeli ground forces do go into Gaza? I mean, what exactly will they be seeking to do?
Well, again, with my military hat on, you always want clear objectives, and it's pretty clear what Israel has said is they want to destroy Hamas. Now, that's great as an ideological ambition, but when it comes to practically speaking, Hamas is an organization, but it's also a belief system, it's also an ideology. And therefore, how do you actually do that? We're seeing the first stages of that, the bombing campaign, which is designed to take out the infrastructure, Hamas's leadership, probably some weapons supplies, communications nodes and stuff like that. But if you actually want to take out individuals, you have to end up going in on foot. And that will be an infantry operation. It won't be tanks. Tanks may well encircle Gaza City. But the urban warfare, it's no place for a tank. And therefore, it becomes extremely dangerous, extremely difficult. And you can only imagine that Hamas will fight, but then as soon as the times get tough, they'll just blend away into the Palestinian peace, the civilian population, and all of a sudden leave Israel very frustrated. And you can just imagine Israel walking away, believing job's done, and the very next day, a rocket barrage firing across the border from a petulant Hamas. It's very difficult to see what good success looks like from a military operation into Gaza.
Is it realistic or even possible to dismantle Hamas in a ground offensive? I mean, what would that look like?
Well, unfortunately, you would end up getting involved in some form of urban conflict, and without wishing to be melodramatic, the last time we saw that in recent times was the Russians going into Bakhmut. And you'll recall that 30,000 Russian soldiers died in street-to-street fighting. Every corner, every window, every door offers a threat. And that will be very, very difficult for the IDF. Plus the fact Hamas has got a network of tunnels under Gaza City known as the Gaza Metro. And some reports suggest that there are hundreds of kilometers of tunnels underneath. And the Israelis will have no idea where they are. The Hamas will have spent literally decades investing in these tunnels. By all accounts, they've got power, they've got communications, they've got weapons, they've got headquarters underground, rest areas, the like. And that means Hamas could pop up almost anywhere in the city and cause absolute carnage on the IDF. So if the Israelis do decide to go in, and I think the jury's still out about whether they will actually go right into the centre of the Gaza city, the real question is, it's very difficult to see how they will be able to extinguish Hamas, and it could be an extremely costly battle for them.
57 years ago today, a small mining town in South Wales suffered a tragic disaster. 116 children and 28 adults were killed when slurry caused by a build-up of coal mining waste slid down a hill, burying their school and several houses. The mining industry in the UK has largely gone, but its dark legacy, the coal tips and their dangers remain. Our correspondent Yoloap David reports.
In the Rhondda Valleys at one time, there were 60 coal mines and more than 40,000 working underground. The hills weren't green, but covered in spoil heaps, hundreds of thousands of tons of coal mining waste.
The question is, I suppose, while something may have been deemed safe in the, say, the 1980s or something like that, it doesn't necessarily mean that's the case for all time. The industry is gone, the employment that it provided for the people of the valleys has gone, but the tips are still here, and they're still posing a potential risk, I suppose.
Most disused coal tips are overgrown. Vegetation hides the waste, but not the risk. 3 years ago, more than 60,000 tons of coal waste rushed down the hill near the village of Tylerstown after heavy rain during Storm Dennis. No one died and no home was wrecked, but it frightened many locals.
I don't think none of them are safe. Because, I mean, how many are there in all of the valleys? I mean, it's not only the Rhondda, it's the Cynon, it's the further down and everywhere else. I mean, across the country, more or less, but everybody seems to ignore them.
In 1966, disaster struck. 116 children in Aberfan's Pantglas school were killed under an avalanche of mining waste. It engulfed houses too, and 28 people also died. The scars from 57 years ago are deeply painful. Local campaigners argue it's in the public interest for governments to publish which old coal tips are dangerous and their precise locations.
I think the biggest risk at the moment is that these coal tips are still there. They're on the side of hills, above where people live, above where people go to the leisure centre, cycle, walk, above infrastructure that's critical to the valleys. And currently, there's no law in place to ensure that's being safeguarded.
Near Tylerstown, one tip at least has been removed at a cost of almost $10 million. But there are others, unstable after heavy rainfall, and climate change could exacerbate the problem.
I think there's a lot of secrecy, and there's a lot of, oh, we are monitoring, and then you raise the question of, well, what does that monitoring actually mean, and how's that going to help if we do find that the water tables are rising, that there is more water in these structures as climate change happens?
As work continues on the Tylerstown tip, I wanted to ask Welsh ministers and local government leaders why won't they say where the at-risk coal tips are, especially those which may be problematic or even dangerous in the future. They either didn't reply or declined to be interviewed. The UK government won't pay for an industrial clean-up. Wales's government is vague despite promising it would help to safeguard properties and people and avoid another catastrophe. Yoloap David, CGTN, Aberfan, Wales.
For decades, a trip through the Moracha Canyon in Montenegro involved driving on one of the country's most dangerous roads. But that's all changed thanks to the opening of a new Chinese-built highway. Our correspondent Alyosha Malenkovic reports.
Meet Goran Jankovic. He is a local commander in the Protection and Rescue Service in Montenegro's capital, Podgorica. Goran lives in a village some 30 kilometers north of downtown Podgorica, where his family owns a small tourist farm.
This highway totally changed my life and the lives of my family. From the city rush, we moved to a country-style life, and it was more than the right decision. And we already had the first tourists last year who came through the village just because the highway was opened.
Before that, it took Goran over an hour to drive to work on the dangerous road of the Moracha Canyon. Now his commute is 20 minutes on a comfortable and, most importantly, much safer road.
So far, we've had about 1,500 and 1,700 casualties on the old road through the Maracha Canyon. Now, since this highway is actively used, we've had some accidents, but they are incomparable with the numbers from the old road.
The infamous Maracha Canyon Road is bypassed by this Chinese-built feat of engineering. It starts at 63 meters above sea level, rising to 1,000 meters over its 41 kilometers. This project encompasses a series of 20 bridges and 16 tunnels, all built by 3,000 Chinese and local workers. The highway takes drivers through some of the most challenging terrains on Earth, but also offers stunning views. That difficult construction was just the beginning of this project, which says of vital importance for Montenegro. The government is already considering the next step, but financial considerations make future projects more difficult.
It is evident now that because of the state of the public finances and the turbulent events on the financial market, a model of financing the highway from our budget is almost impossible. So we are open for the public-private partnership or other concession models.
The costs of the remaining sections of the highway might be too heavy for Montenegro, but would be popular with the people like Goran, who says the new highway has already changed lives for the better. Aljosha Milenkovic, CGTN, Podgorica.
The headlines again. Aid begins crossing into Gaza from Egypt's Rafah checkpoint. 20 vehicles have so far gone through, which the United Nations says is far short of what's needed. Dozens more Palestinians are killed as Israel maintains its heavy bombardment of Gaza. Prime Minister Benjamin Netanyahu vows to fight until victory. And world leaders and diplomats have gathered in Cairo for a summit to try to find solutions to the humanitarian crisis in Gaza. And that is the world today. Thank you for watching. There's more news on CGTN Europe's channel on the Telegram app, or scan the QR code on the screen to get stories and updates sent direct to your phone. More news at the top of this hour. Coming up next, it's The Agenda with Juliette Mann. For now, from me and all the team here, goodbye.